Hello, everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to talk about a topic that is well known to almost every single airsofter: spending money. Airsoft is not an inexpensive hobby, and in fact, it can be a real money sink depending on the types of guns and gear you go after. We've talked about a lot on the podcast before about the kinds of things that are interesting to us, stuff we recommend to buy, the idea of buying once, trying once, that kind of stuff. And really, when it comes to gear that we use, while it's not the cheapest that's available out there, it pales in comparison when you start looking at the cost of real steel gear like, cryplate carriers, night vision optics, thermals, etc. And especially for new players, it can sometimes feel like you're trying to catch up, so to speak, to the guns and gear that players more senior than you might be using. So today, we thought we'd spend some time talking about spending money in Airsoft, where we have chosen to spend and not spend money, and why, in a nutshell, comparison is not only the thief of joy, but also steals your money. So let's get into it. And I think there's this, just overall, when you start playing Airsoft, you just want to buy everything. Right? You're like, oh my God, everything is so cool. I want to buy all of it, right?
Totally. I mean, frankly, I still want one of every gun a lot of days. Need, no, want, yes. And one of the things that I said to Phil as soon as he proposed this topic idea was that, it probably bears mentioning on our actual podcast that, we... really, Pat has a serious case of, ooh, shiny. And that's not necessarily a good thing for you to emulate. I would almost argue the opposite.
Definitely. And I think when you think about, ooh, shiny and all this kind of stuff, it's... You need to know and work within your budget, right? First off, you can't just, obviously money is a real issue for everyone. You can't just go and buy everything that you see all the time. Right? Otherwise, everyone would have these massive, giant collection of airsoft guns. But more importantly than that, I think you need to be a bit more discreet in the kinds of things that you're going to target if you have a limited budget. And the reality is, when you hit the airsoft field for, the first time, the 10th time, maybe in your first year or first 2 years or whatever, and you see a player who's decked out in gear, chances are they didn't buy that all at once, right?
I mean, I don't know, to be honest, anyone who has just sort of walked up to Airsoft and dumped, a full kit worth of money on it. Other than, frankly, the occasional, kid whose parents are, lighting their credit card on fire for the fun of it.
Or you can have people like Glick when he started playing. He was like, Airsoft is something that I want to do. I'm a working professional. I have money set aside. I'm going to buy a whole kit, and then I'll go to my first Airsoft gun in that kit. But that first Airsoft game, and with that kit, I should say. But even in his case, the gear that he had at the time, it wasn't the most expensive gear, right? He had a pretty decent AEG and all this kind of stuff, but he wasn't showing up in, a $1,500 AEG wearing a $3,000 plate carrier and all kinds of stuff like that. He had, a good kit, but a basic kit. And his kit, he might not be happy about it, but has certainly grown, and he's invested a lot more money since that time getting into the sport. But when
I think we can agree that he's also an outlier, right?
Definitely.
And in fairness, when I started, I think I dropped $800, $900 because I decided this was something I really wanted to do, and I'm a boots first kind of guy in that sense. But, that was a G&G Scar, which were very expensive at the time. A vest, boots, goggles, right? It wasn't actually, an enormous volume of kit. I think you'd do better on your $900 today.
Definitely. Well, the prices have gone down in Canada substantially. So the money that we invested when we started playing, I think about my first airsoft gun, which was a Tokyo Marui FAMAS. I've said it before. I paid $600 for that airsoft gun at the time, which is bananas because they're $200 now, right? So, but I mean, you're talking 16 years ago, so it's, different world too.
Totally. But, I think one of the things that is worth pointing out there, none of our team really are rocking necessarily the most, if you will, Gucci gear. You know, we rock stuff that we think is effective. We've talked about the fact that, you know, I'm running a real steel plate carrier because I just got to the point where I was like, I'm tired of tearing pieces physically off of repro stuff.
A chest rig, you mean?
Yeah, chest rig rather than plate carrier. But part of it was just that a lot of the repro stuff in airsoft is made in Chinese sizing, and I'm not.
Yeah.
You know, that being said, there were a ton of options for me that weren't a $300 piece of kit. You know, you can buy a sort of like Chicom style chest rig for $60. It won't be, you know, designed for M4 mags, but it's also $60.
Yeah, or even cheaper sometimes.
Sure.
Like I think John's, I can't remember where he got his, but I think he said it was like, you know, $20 or $30. And if you want to mod it for M4 mags, you can try to find, you know, foam to stuff in the bottom. I think Cal is looking at doing that with his, so you can do both if that's what you want, right? Also, you know, when you're starting out, you may not have 10 mags. Maybe you have 2 or 3. Pockets are great.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like there's tons of options out there that don't necessarily break the bank, and they can totally be interim solutions depending on the cost of what it is that you're looking at. And you've talked about that before. I can't remember what is it the Sam Vimes principle that you've said before?
Yep.
Right? Like, you know, if the item that you're looking at is going to cost you $20, but you're going to have to buy it every year, but you could buy a good quality one for $80 that will last you 5 years, well, you should do the $80 one, right? And we've talked about that in the concept of buying once and crying once. And there's certain things where spending the money is definitely worth it. And there's other things that, you know, you can, especially in airsoft purposes, you can really get away with not spending that much money. And I am very much of the opinion that if you are only playing airsoft, spending several $100s for a real steel plate carrier is not going to give you any meaningful advantage compared to a replica plate carrier that is half or, you know, less than 3 times the cost.
Certainly. I mean, I think, you know, the 694 plate carriers that we ran mostly were in around the $100 range for a repro. And I think a real one is just at a 0 or 2. Like, you know, it's 1,000 or 2,000. Like, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, and maybe not quite that much, but still, like it's orders of magnitude more expensive.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
It's been, to be honest, a long while since I've looked. I know, like I remember looking at a real Cyraz when I started playing airsoft because I was like, oh, how much is a real one? And I remember also, you know, passing out. Like,
yeah,
oh.
Yeah.
But you know, I guess the point I'm trying to make there is like, yeah, you don't need a real steel plate carrier chest rig for airsoft purposes. Most of the stuff we're getting, to be completely honest, the repro stuff, has a reasonable chance of being factory seconds from China anyway. Like, you know, not that I can demonstrate that that is the case, but even if it's not, you know, it's still made of Cordura. It's still quite durable. As we mentioned before, right? That Cyraz that I started with is still kicking around and still pretty much looks brand new. Airsoft just doesn't put that kind of wear and tear on kit. You know, I said ripping pieces off, but that's more an issue of like wearing gear that's not well suited to my body type and getting angry with it. You know, or like probably don't let someone try to use your drag handle to pull you around on your repro gear. That will not work out as well.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not as well stitched as it should be.
There's certain things that we've really specifically went out of our way to make sure that we're buying good quality, you know, either, you know, real steel or the best quality that we can afford. And some of the things that we will spend money on, we've talked about before. I mean, excluding iPro, which of course we've always said, like, you can't put a price on that. You should be getting with the best iPro that you can afford for a variety of different reasons.
And especially given that $40 Canadian will get you, you know, everything you need.
There's really no excuse. But aside from that, like when you think about some of the items that we've bought that are that have a full price tag to them, a sling is a great example of that, right? A sling is a piece of kit that you should be spending money on that will ensure that you get a real deal quality sling. And you don't have to be spending $100 on like a Vickers or a Slingster or something like that. In fact, you can get a real steel rifle sling with like a, you know, a heat treated tempered metal end, right, hook of some variety that's 2 points for, $30, $40. Like, go to a hunting supply store and just buy a real rifle sling. And the reason you want to do that is because your airsoft gun is generally going to be one of the more expensive pieces of your kit that you're rocking, unless you're running thermals or whatever. So, but that's a different conversation. But like, your airsoft rifle is going to be a big investment for you, especially if you're starting out. And dropping it and breaking it or potentially doing damage to it sucks. And you can easily avoid that by using a sling. And you, like I said, don't have to get a slingster, although those are great and we love them. I know, for example, Johnny has an AK, a really crappy AK, but it's going to get better. But he has a 2-point sling for it, which is like the original 2-point sling that most AKs come with.
Did anyone else hear the sound of a project wandering towards me ominously?
Yeah, well, you'll get that eventually. But yeah, so he's got this like cheapo 2-point sling that is a real steel rifle sling, and it works just fine. It does exactly all the things that he needs to do with it. Is it adjustable? No. Does it have padding? No. Is it a high-speed Faro concept slingster? Of course not. But does it do the main thing that a rifle sling is supposed to do, which is retain your rifle and make sure that it doesn't accidentally fall? Yes, it does all those things. And you can get that kind of sort of quality and real steel quality in a lot of different places without necessarily breaking the bank. And we talk about like secondhand items, but we also talk about surplus items. And we've both used secondhand items and surplus items. In fact, I was talking to someone on the Discord today, and I told him I have very, very seldom actually had a brand new airsoft gun. Right? I think the G&G Scar is probably the only one.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if it is working and it is the form factor you want, and it does the other things you need, yeah, there's pretty much zero reason to buy new relative to buying secondhand, other than maybe your own personal comfort with like having a return policy or something like that. I think the gun you're currently using was bought new. In fact, I know it was, because I bought it and did unto it at length. But, I have owned at least as many secondhand airsoft guns as I have owned firsthand ones. And there's been no correlation between relative newness and performance or need of maintenance or anything.
Totally.
My only real, I guess, comment there is ideally you want to make sure you can like look at it and take a look at the screws and make sure they're not stripped out and stuff like that before you buy it. So like, even if you're buying online, make sure you ask for a picture of the motor grip with a good clear shot of the screws so that you can make sure those aren't stripped out. Ditto, if you're talking about an M4, the mag catch screw, just a couple things like that, which is not stuff people would necessarily think to look at. And speaking as a gun tech, if you're ever going to have to go into it, and you should assume you might at some point have to, that's sort of doing your due diligence. But beyond that, if someone says it's working, you can always make sure to ask them for a video of it shooting, just to, again, cover yourself. But really, the P90 was secondhand. The only pistol I've ever owned that was brand new is the Glock, and I haven't had any issues. I think, again, the only brand new guns I've ever bought were an M16 and M4.
Yeah. And like, that's totally fine. Like, I think if you're going to the airsoft field and you're seeing guys running around with like really expensive guns, really high performing guns, you might feel the need to want to keep up with them. And so, you just go and spend $1,500 on a brand new, like, top of the line, whatever. But you can also get there yourself. And like, that's what we've done. I mean, aside from my current gun that has been sort of like, I knew exactly what I wanted and we just made that happen. Right. My previous guns were all, for lack of better terms, Frankenstein, like one part at a time or a couple parts at a time. It's like, hey, we'll do the barrel this week, and next month when I have a bit more money, we'll do a motor, or we'll do, whatever. That's legit. Like, unless you're going and you're specifically paying for a gun tech one time and you want to do all that, that's fine. But if you're picking at it yourself, there's no real reason why you should feel the need to just, again, spend all that money up front. And yes, you can go and buy a pre-upgraded gun from a manufacturer or vendor, I should say, like an online store that is pre-upgraded and has a warranty, and that's all fine and dandy. But you can get there yourself, right? And you really should not feel any pressure to do that just to keep up with other people, right?
And, I would say, to sort of add to that, that there are probably parts groupings that it makes sense to replace together. So if you're putting if you're putting in a new motor, putting in new gears is a good idea, stuff like that. But yeah, certainly, the the $400 ish Canadian of parts that are stock build can very easily be broken down into $400 purchases, or maybe even a little less. And I think there's tremendous validity in doing that. At the moment, if I were going to go purchase the parts for that, I'd probably do it all at once. But I also fiscally am in a place where I can do that. I think none of the guns I've built, except maybe the last one. I think I had most of the stuff arrive at once. But it's not the norm, and I don't think you should expect it to be. I think going, we're going to build this and this and this and this time is, a piece at a time is great.
Yeah, the same logic applies to your gear as well, right? Like, you can look at your kit and go, yeah, I want to build a kit, or even if you're thinking about doing an impression, for example, you can look at all the parts and go, yeah, I'm going to buy them all now and break the bank, or you can just sort of take it sort of piecemeal, like one piece at a time or a couple pieces at a time, and slowly build it over time. Like, if you look at the guys who have impressions and you're like, oh, I need to do that overnight. Well, guess what? They didn't do that overnight either. Like, you look at John's Para kit or his World War II Murder Hobo kit, like, those didn't happen overnight. They didn't even happen over, 2 months or 6 months. Like, it's years in the making to get a kit at that level. So putting that expectation on yourself, number one, is not really setting yourself up for success, but it's really potentially putting you at a fiscal disadvantage if you're sort of jumping in, like you said, boots first, Pat, and being like, I just got to get all of it. It's like, all of this is really expensive. Impressions is for sure, but like even your regular airsoft kit, if you're looking at your stuff and you're like, okay, well, I need new boots and I'm gonna need some knee pads. I want pants with integrated knee pads that are adjustable. Okay, I'm gonna pick those up, and a combat shirt, and a new plate carrier, and then a helmet, and then ear pro, and then face pro, and then new goggles, and then suddenly you're like looking at $2,000 to get all this stuff. Like, you shouldn't feel that you need all of this stuff in order to be able to have fun on the airsoft field, right?
And like, very factually, John will tell you if you ask him, there are ways to be smart about buying this stuff. He has, I'm going to say 4 World War II helmets that are real, like they were issued. And he's gotten almost all of them second, third, 87th hand. But he's also gotten most of them like virtually thrifting, right? Like, go to antique shop, buy a helmet because they don't care about it because it's been there for 20 years and how many people are willing to pay $100 for it. Well, you go, no one's willing to pay $100 for it. How about 30? And they go, nah. Yeah. I'm sick of it being in the way. But if you were looking for a 416, right? I've been keeping an eye on the Canadian airsoft buy and sells for the last 2 months. Just in case, like, I'm still planning to buy the one from the local guy, but like, we don't have anything signed in blood, stone, at anything. So if I see one on one of those buy and sells before he gets back from wherever he's working, and it's $100 cheaper, I'm probably going to do that,
Yeah. But again, like, one of the things that is important here, and you're sort of betraying it in the conversation, is that requires a certain amount of patience.
Totally.
Right? So, like,
Which
you
is not
said,
my best
you've
skill.
been looking at them for like the last 2 months. So yeah, you had to delay that gratification, right? You had to be like, okay, I'm going to wait and see what I can see, right? And if you're like, oh, me want 416 now, well, that, again, like, the convenience of that is, well, you're going to have to pay full price or what have you. And if you don't have the budget, you don't have the budget, right?
Oh, yeah, and I mean, in fairness, if he were around right now, I'd hand him the money today because, again, patience is not necessarily my strongest suit. But,
yeah,
if I can save the $100 and use it to buy a couple more EPM PMags or a holster for the PX4, because I still haven't gotten around to ordering that, that's solid, right? That's an intelligent decision. which, as Phil will tell you, is sort of anathema to me, but that's a separate problem.
Well, I mean, it is what it is.
So I do think that there are intelligent ways to go about this, and I think that having some patience and shopping around in terms of your gun is a really good idea. We've talked about this before, but like if you were to ask me, what pieces can I cheap out on, what pieces can I skip? Especially if you live in the States, secondhand BDUs are so cheap. I am envious of how cheap they are.
Yeah, definitely.
And like secondhand woodland will do you, right? It is not Gucci, but it works. Assuming you live in the right area of the world. You probably don't need a pistol. Your first season, let's say. Your first year of airsoft, unless you are planning on doing indoor CQP. They're cool.
Yeah.
But like, that's $200 you don't need to spend right away.
Yeah. And we've talked about as well, like one of the things we're getting away from is military style combat boots, like in favor of civilian hikers.
Oh my God.
If you don't already have hikers, which you totally can use for airsoft, you can still buy secondhand military combat boots, right? And you can get them at, like an army surplus store or whatever. They're very inexpensive and they'll do you just fine. You can also buy a pair of hiking boots at like a thrift store. That will do you just fine as well. Like, again, is it going to be as Gucci as, having a pair of Salomons or a pair of Arc'teryx boots and being able to flex on the other people at the field? Like, no, but like, why? Like, the purpose is to make sure you have the right gear for yourself.
If you're flexing
right?
on the other airsoft players about your boots and they are not like World War II boots, go away.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, I don't think you should be flexing on people about your footwear at airsoft, but like, especially not there.
Yeah. And like, yes, we do believe that it's worth money to buy good boots for airsoft, right? Because it protects your ankles. We've talked about them a lot. I just did a video with Johnny where he talks about his sort of mid-rise and higher boots that he's using. And yeah, totally. Like we absolutely think it's worth the money. But just because it's worth the money doesn't mean you have to go and spend that money, right? Like, is that something that you need? You may have footwear that's just fine. I know Stefan for years wore like his work boots. Right? They were like full, like high, ankle rise basically with a steel toe. He still might wear those. I don't know, but they were like Red Wings shoes, I think is what they were called.
Yeah.
Anyways, point is, he used those for years and years and years, and they were just fine. His toe got a little cold in the winter because of the steel toe, but like whatever. And that's absolutely fine. And there's tons and tons and tons of options out there if you're not looking to break the bank on this kit. The challenge is that, and I sort of intimated this at the start, but like many people feel like you must, right? And that is a slippery slope to go down because, firstly, when you look at what makes an airsoft player a good airsoft player, and we've said this before, I believe, very, very rarely is it the gear that they're using. Now, with one important caveat, which is that if you are playing a night game and you don't have night vision optics or thermal optics, and the other team does,
you're doomed.
That is a problem, right? Because they have a piece of equipment that legitimately gives you an advantage and gives them a feature that you cannot replicate otherwise. Yeah, you can have a flashlight, but it's a different sort of situation. We've talked about the same thing with like airsoft grenades. Airsoft grenades provide you an edge on the field that nothing else you carry can give you. There is nothing else that you can throw in a room that will go bang and take out people in the room without exposing yourself first. And in the same way, night vision optics or thermal optics or whatever gives you that type of advantage that nothing else can recreate. So yes, if you are going to a night game and you don't have night vision optics and the other team does, then yeah, absolutely. It's very, very hard to compete in that scenario. But in a regular skirmish, in the day, that does not involve night vision optics or vehicles of some sort or helicopters or whatever, it's like a regular skirmish, right? It's very, very seldom that it's the player's gear that makes them a better player on the field.
And
right?
I think also, let's be real, virtually no airsoft players have access to night vision and thermals. Like, there are obviously people who have them, but the percentage is so low as to be statistically ignorable. And hey, if you have $3,000-$5,000 to burn on night optics for airsoft, and you can want to go play night games with them, awesome. If you want to go play night games with them, also awesome. It's just outside of my conceivable budget for this hobby.
And also interest, right? Like we talked about, John and I talked about this as well. Like he's interested in playing night games. He really enjoys it. He has a flashlight on his gun. That's great. That's not something that I'm particularly interested in. Will I do it? Will I have fun with it? Definitely. But my interest is not high enough that I'm going to go take out a second mortgage to be able to buy some thermals, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I had LASIK. My night vision sucks. End of discussion. It's not a thing I'm ever going to be super into doing. And in fairness, before I had LASIK, my night vision still sucked, and I still wasn't terribly interested in doing it.
Yeah. And to be clear, like we're talking out of our depth because neither of us has used night vision optics, nor do we play night games. So if that's the kind of thing that you're dead set on doing and you want to spend the money on, that's absolutely fine. But again,
ignore the hell out of me.
Well, but like Pat was saying too, like there are lots and lots and lots of airsofters who play night games and don't use night vision. So you'll probably be just fine. But when it comes to the rest of it, right, and the rest of your kit, if your feeling is, oh, well, I need a better gun to be able to compete on the airsoft field, unless you're using some sort of like Springer or gun that can't reach out to 50 feet, you're probably okay with what you have if you readjust your playstyle. And I'll give you an example. I think about Johnny, right? And I've seen Johnny play airsoft with his FAL. His Echo, I think it's an Echo 1 FAL. That's the one that you're currently chopped up into little bits, if I'm not mistaken, Pat. Anyway, point is...
Yes, I haven't put it in the grinder yet.
So I saw him play almost an entire season with that piece of junk, right? And he did just fine.
You could throw BBs further.
Totally. Right, maybe not quite that bad. His AK is worse. But the point is that the FAL was hot garbage. But it was actually fine in Johnny's hands because he knew the limitations of the airsoft gun that he was using. He knew his own abilities as a player, and he made it work. So yeah, could he reach out 75 feet with his FAL? No, he couldn't. So guess what? He moved a lot, right?
Yep. Well, it's like
he got close, right?
I've played games with, realistically, like a stock Raider in the last 5 or 6 years. Largely because it was like, someone wanted to try my gun, and I said, sure. You change your approach, right? You up the amount of trigger pulls to get a hit. You move closer to the target. You maneuver and push forward more than you do with, the sort of DMR style rifles that I have tended to build. Sure, no problem. That's just an adjustment you're making as a player going, all right, I know what I'm using, and I'm going to use it intelligently. Yeah,
exactly.
So... Yeah, as Phil said, right? Unless you're looking at, a Springer or otherwise, just a really garbage gun. And even there, the FAL feels right. It's not shooting right. You can be effective. You don't need that sort of hardware edge. I would argue that, we're pushing that, but that's in some ways because I love the mad science of seeing what I can get out of these things. And in some ways because, I think it's fair to say that my teammates have become accustomed to that quality to some extent. But, Chris is really, really effective with his current gun, which is built, quote unquote, to spec. His previous gun was not. He was really, really effective with that too. It's more about knowing what your kit can do for you and knowing how to use it than it is about, pouring $1,500 into it, right? Like if you're brand new, you've never played airsoft before, you don't really know what you're doing, and you're taking, a poor mindset to the game with you in terms of crouching way down at the back or just not moving at all, or any other, error that I'm sure I've made because I've made all of them, still do. Giving you my gun's not going to do that much, right?
Yeah, totally.
Even, tossing my HPA M27 dialed in with the nice optic on it and everything. If I give it to a kid who is brand new, yeah, sure, they're going to have a really accurate gun, and they're probably going to get a couple of kills with it. But are they going to be effective in terms of pushing my team's objectives forward and doing stuff? Not really.
Yeah,
or maybe they'll be brilliant, but, on average, no.
Yeah, totally. And the thing about it is I remember last season when my gun was having trouble and stuff, it was not performing really well, right? Let's be honest, it really wasn't. Totally. And it was frustrating the crap out of me. Like there were lots of games where I was coming off the field and I'm like, "Ugh, I did not have a good time and stuff." Did that mean that I, as a player, was not capable? Did it mean that I was not effective on the field? I was probably a little bit less effective than I was before, not really because of my gun, but mostly because I had a crap attitude about it. But I was still able to make it work, right? I was still able to move around the field, work with Johnny, work with my team, hold a corner, put fire down. I just had to do it from, 10, 15, 25, 50 feet closer than I ideally would have liked to. But that's just the accommodation that I had to make. But at the end of the day, and the reason why I'm saying this is because when I look at this problem, right, at the time I knew sort of, okay, well, I need to fix this, that, the other thing because my gun's not working the way that it should. That's fine. But it was never about, oh, I need my gun to be doing better because I can't compete and keep up with anybody else on the field if I don't.
There's a difference between I'm used to pull trigger twice, get hit at this range. That is what this should be doing, and it's not ARG. And I'm combat ineffective.
Yeah, exactly.
The 249 setup that I've got, that I'm working on, is comparatively junk, right? Like it has way less reach than I would be willing to argue all of my other guns. It has way less accuracy than all of my other guns. The rate of fire definitely makes up for it to some extent, as long as, you don't mind the fact that, I'm going to shoot a lot of BBs. But I have to change how I'm playing with it. I have to get closer. I have to push up more, which is admittedly a little awkward with a really heavy gun, but whatever, I'm a big dude. It also requires a playstyle adjustment of like hugging and cover vastly more than I usually do because I'm closer, and also because everyone wants to shoot the guy with the 249.
Yeah. The other thing, and I think you're sort of touching on it there as well, but really at the end of the day, like when you're looking at how you're going to be spending the money on your gear, like fun really needs to be the focus, right? Now I think about the 249 as an example because like, I mean, is it like the top shelf kind of like, oh yeah, this is going to make me so combat effective, blah, blah, blah. Like obviously not, right? But it's fun. And that's a choice that you've made to look at that and go, yeah, we're going to make this work. We're going to have fun with it. And that's going to that's going to make my play style and my playtime more enjoyable. And that's certainly one aspect. What you don't want to get into is this notion of like, oh, well, I need to buy this because it's the newest, it's the latest and greatest. And a good example of that is HPA, right? Because HPA, I would say right now is I'm seeing more of a vogue for HPA. Let's call it.
There's definitely a lot of hype and like
totally.
We've talked about this before. Like I'm really enjoying my HPA gun. I bought it really because I wanted to try building one. Yeah. End of discussion.
But the thing about it is that if you're on the Discord and you're in the gun teching, channel and stuff like that, people will tell you how awesome HPA is. And you may feel like if you're not using HPA, you're an idiot. Right? They may say that literally, and if they do, please tell us because we'll ban the crap out of them. But more likely, you will read all these great comments about how good, how consistent HPA is, how fun it is to use. And people will, and I think about Todd, for example, made the really great comment at some point. He's like, yeah, people are against remote lines, but most people who say that haven't actually used a remote line before. And that's legit, right? But you may read through the lines there and understand and think that what they're saying is you have to have this, otherwise you're limiting yourself, you're hamstringing yourself, you're not good enough. And that's totally bunk. Firstly, I don't truly believe anyone in our Discord feels that way. But secondly, it's just not the truth, right? It absolutely isn't, for the exact same reason that you were just saying, Pat. Like, you can give someone an HPA gun, but if they're bringing their crap attitude, right, to their play style, doesn't matter if they're using an HPA. They might as well be using a real gun. It's probably not going to help them, right? Like, come on.
But also, so like my current HPA build, like the parts that went inside the M27 for that build cost more than the parts for the equivalent AEG build that we run, and perform about the same.
Yeah.
Right? So, do I think there are benefits to the HPA build? Definitely. Am I having a lot of fun running it? 100%. Should you go out and HPA your gun right now, like jump up out of this chair? No.
Like, especially if you're a beginner.
Yeah, I mean, partly because it is shall we say, a technologically complicated and somewhat irritating thing to get set up. I would argue that it's probably no more so than a good AEG build. I'm just at a different place on the learner's curve with it. But if you're looking at me going, oh man, I'm going to do this because it's the new thing, that's probably not a good approach, right? I'll be the first to admit that, like, I am buying a 416 because I like the way they look. Totally. Do I like the way they look a little better than an M4? Yep. Does that matter in terms of performance? Nope, not at all. Yeah. Not even a little bit. But I think that's a fine decision to make. If my finances allow over the summer, I want to put a HPA setup into that 249 because I want to laugh evilly while I shoot it at people. But that's not necessarily about effective performance. It's about having a laugh. The situation you should be looking at the end of the day, really, like, I mean, this sort of is, I guess, common discourse for us, but you should be looking at your kit and assessing what you need based on sort of critical thought. If you were looking at your kit and going, oh my God, that thing's so cool, I want to buy it. Sure, no problem. If you can afford it and you're not going to be eating ramen for the next 6 years because of it or something stupid. If you can't, that's not going to be a thing that should be ruining your fun, right? You can play around most sort of limitations in terms of, oh, my gun's not as good as it absolutely could be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of people shoot Phil and I using stock guns all the time.
Absolutely. And it really, you should not feel the pressure from other people. We've talked about that a bit before as well. Like, you shouldn't feel pressure from other people to buy the stuff. If people are making you feel like, oh, you're not good enough because you're not using a cryplate carrier, like, really, they need to just take a long walk off a short pier. Like, it really is not acceptable, in my opinion, to make people feel that way, number one. And if you're feeling that way, then, let me be the first to tell you that I, as a player, I don't use all the Gucci stuff that the players you might look up to use, right? It's fine. You don't need it. It's okay. Just go and have fun. And to be honest, like, if you look at the way that I've built my kit over the years, I really don't spend a tremendous amount of money on airsoft. Pat will tell you, for years, I mean, there's a different story, different part of my life, but, like, didn't buy the best gear that I could. I bought as cheap as I could, didn't really want to spend the money. And it's only now recently that I'm looking at, like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to drop a couple $100 and make this problem go away for a very long time. EarPro is a good example of that. That was my big purchase last year. What is my big purchase going to be this year? Remains to be seen.
TBA, stay tuned to this channel.
Yeah, for sure. But, like, that's how I approach it, right? I only have one airsoft gun. I only have one airsoft pistol. I have a couple grenades. My big purchase is probably going to be BBs, to be honest with you, because, we all laugh, but I go through a lot of them. And that shit gets expensive. So, but... to come back to it, like, if you're looking at your kit going like, oh, I can really only afford to do like one thing or two things, and sure, that's fine. There's no rule here, right?
Yeah, try to prioritize in terms of what you think will give you
totally
the most fun or the most improvement, whichever way you want to look at it. Often, I feel they're the same for me, but to be frank, if you're like, man, the thing I will have the most fun out of is a Denison, right? And you don't need one for whatever reason. Yeah, do it. If the thing you'll have the most fun with is a pistol, I mean, unless you don't have an AEG, because if you don't have an AEG and you're going to go play airsoft with most people, and you should buy one. That should be your first purchase. But if you'd rather buy, just a belt and toss some mag pouches on it that are super cheap and buy a pistol instead of buying a chest rig or a plate carrier, do it. It is your hobby. It is your fun.
And if you're looking at other people's kit, like I said at the start, like, comparison is the thief of joy. If you're looking at someone's fully built kit going like, oh yeah, I want that. They didn't build that overnight, nor should you. Ask them, hey, what was the first thing that you bought? And then just mirror that, and they'll go, yeah, well, the first couple of years that I was building this kit, I did that, the other thing. And then suddenly you start to realize that it took them a while, and it's okay for it to take you a while too, but just really be smart about it. And we haven't really talked about this very much, but you really should have an airsoft budget. Well, I mean, as an adult, especially, you should have a budget in general for your expenses and all this kind of stuff. But you should be looking at what can you afford to spend on airsoft, and by and large, stick to that. That's a bit of dad advice for you, even though I'm not a dad. But like, yeah, have a budget. Look at your expenses. See what you can and can't afford to be spending on airsoft. That includes the fees that you're paying to go play, like milsims and like travel and like your BBs and your consumables and stuff, and figure it out. Like Pat said, I think if you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be eating ramen for the next like 6 years, even the next 6 months, I would not recommend you doing that thing, right? If you're like, oh, I need to pick up a second job to go play airsoft, I mean, there's ways you could probably be looking at that a little bit better, right? So definitely don't feel pressure from other people to put yourself in those financial situations. And I know it's kind of boring to talk about that. And I promise we'll return to our regularly scheduled airsoft programming, but just give it some thought as well. Like, think about what is reasonable for you to be, it's spending in terms of concrete values. I can't tell you what that is for yourself. You should be thinking about that for yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the running themes of our stuff is, be smart about this. And that applies very much to spending money on airsoft, not that I always am, but I tend to leave myself space in my budgeting for the odd stupid purchase, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of is there money in the stupid purchase bank account for this stuff? If there is, awesome. If not, then it's like, all right, well, I guess I will, rein that desire to buy something daft in and hold off, right? Totally. And, again, Phil's right, this is not the most fun chat in the world, but like, if you're looking at dropping $1,000 on a HPA setup, don't put it on your credit card. Save it up, set it aside. That way, if you, A, run into problems saving the money, you haven't done something stupid, and B, it'll honestly be that much more satisfying when you buy it.
And you're not paying 16% plus on your interest on your cards.
Yeah, right.
There's that.
16? Where are you getting 16? Ooh, try 20. But yeah, no, that's not a game you want to play, right? Your credit card company wants you to play it, but you shouldn't.
Yeah, I think back to many, many, many years ago when my wife and I were thinking about buying our first house. We consulted with a financial advisor who basically told us, amongst other things, but this particular nugget stuck with me, which is that nobody should be paying interest on a steak dinner, right? And I was like, that is a good piece of advice, and one that I will absolutely take to heart. Sort of waned in the last couple of years, but certainly something to think about when you're looking at your finances. In any event, when it comes to spending money, the best part about airsoft is that when you spend money, you end up with something cool. But you should really be feeling like you're doing that because it's going to be fun for you. It's focused on making your play experience more entertaining, more effective, if that's what you're looking for, and certainly never to please anybody else, because ultimately they're not the ones who are going to be using your guns and gear. You are, right? So it has to be fun for you.
Yeah, it's, the old tank of the lake meme, right? What is the right choice? The one that makes you happy. Mm-hmm.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know it's a little bit more, let's call it serious than we've done in the past, but it's something that we thought about because we saw it popped up in the Discord and we really thought we should address it for you guys. So hopefully you found this conversation, if not enlightening, at least a little bit entertaining. But that's it for us for this week.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.